double-edged sword of that was then having the responsibility of doing the social moderation, and you're pushing it out to quite a broad online digital audience. Talking about suicide prevention, you're going to get a lot of negative and distressing things to moderate. We had to work on developing a more robust framework and support system to adapt, because that was much higher than anything we'd experienced. It was quite significant when we saw the volume and the nature of distressing comments that would come through moderation.
Welcome to Content Matters, where we go behind the scenes of content in high-stakes environments. I'm here with Tom Farrar from Black Dog Institute, and today we're discussing Mullets for Mental Health. Over the past 5 years, this campaign has raised more than $13 million. It's also grown into a community where thousands of men can connect over mental health. We also look at what responsibility looks like when running a campaign this big. So, Tom, hello and welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So let's start with why mental health matters to you and what it means. What first drew you to Black Dog or working in mental health, and when did the work feel personal, not just a job?
It's something that evolved for me over time. I started working in higher education in marketing and communications and developed a purpose for working in the charity impact space through my own personal experiences and secondhand experiences with family and friends, particularly with mental health. That was an area that I was most interested in. Black Dog Institute is leading a lot of the work in that space, doing a lot of research and translating that into services and programs that really have an impact in helping people that are impacted by mental health.
From a people lens, you've mentioned to me before that you had a pop-up team model. Can you explain to our listeners what that means in the context of fundraising or how you manage Mullets for Mental Health? And what did that provide that a locked-in team all year round couldn't do?
It was something more unique to us over that period of time working in campaigns. We have 2 major campaigns each year, Mullets for Mental Health and One Foot Forward at Black Dog Institute. Within the not-for-profit space, there's often a budget constraint, which we had as well. It was a solution we found over time to develop these pop-up teams that come in for 3 or 4 months of the peak campaign period. We recruit, onboard a team, train them in 1 to 2 weeks, and then get into the peak campaign period of supporting key tasks. And we found that was a good balance of being able to be really responsive and adaptable as it changes through different periods. So from when the campaign went live and it's very much an acquisition focus and we're trying to generate registrations and get fundraisers in the door, to the campaign month itself, which is more of a engagement and fundraising type of activities. So we felt like if we had that pop-up team, we could really scale up and down different tasks across the team to make sure that the campaign continued to function as well as it could through that period, and gave us a level of flexibility that a permanent team wouldn't have given us.
Let's dive into Mullets for Mental Health. When did you realize that Instagram should be where it's all at, center stage, and what tipped you off that's where the content should live?
We were really just observing the behaviours of the community through different channels. Mullets is such a unique campaign in the market, and it's a very fun activity for people to be a part of and to participate in. And it's also very visual. We took that insight and thought, why don't we make a space that's really for them? We were pretty hands-off and open-minded to what it might develop into. It took off in that first year and built on its momentum year on year.
Could you dive into your thought process around making it user-generated content led as opposed to brand led?
That's a really interesting point and something that was quite different for a fundraising campaign at the time, to lead with user-generated content. It came back to that original insight that we could see the behavior of people already posting their mullets and wanting to share. We wanted to create that Mullets Instagram community as something that was for our participants and their supporters. And we felt the best way to do that was to build on that behavior. People would most likely engage or want to see other people's stories. Through that time, getting something off the ground, we probably weren't in a position to do a lot of content production ourselves. We really wanted it to look and reflect the community. We really lent into that user-generated content. We were actively finding content, finding people that were posting and getting their written consent to reshare. We found pretty early on in the piece that people really loved that recognition of them participating in the campaign, us acknowledging the hard work that they've put into their mullet or their new look. That was a really nice, positive connection to make with some of our top fundraisers and some of our top supporters. We kept following our nose with that instinct, and where we felt it was really well supported by the campaign, everyone's engaged and really supportive, and it's a positive space and channel for the donors or supporters over time to have a space that's just for them, that they really enjoy, that they really want to engage in, that they have an expectation and an understanding that they're not going to be bombarded with the same ask that they're receiving constantly across the other communications for the campaign, only led to more engagement and more interactions over time.
I love what you said around making Instagram just user content focused so that participants of the campaign don't feel bombarded with other calls to action and have that space they can call their own. Can you tell me, how did that feel? What kind of stories were you seeing? Do you think people were being a lot more honest and open than you would have seen otherwise?
What we found through focusing on user-generated content was it was much more real. Sometimes with campaigns, you do photo shoots, generate and produce all of this content to get to an idea or a visual of the campaign. And that's an idealized version of what it actually is. Through Mullets, Instagram, and the user-generated content focus, we were trying to get to the real thing and bring that to light. We found that people were much more responsive to that. They really wanted to engage. We saw comments, we saw a lot of people in our DMs. When we started to reach out and say, contact us, DM us, and share your photos, people were really active on doing that. And I think it led to that recognition piece and building those positive connections. Over time, people grew an expectation of what it was going to look like. And I think we stayed consistent with that and found a really strong existing audience that wanted to see those types of user-generated content posts.
Are you able to recall a story of who your top fundraiser was? Who had the craziest mullet? Were there stories of people trying to compete with each other for the best one? What were some of the comical things that you were seeing as a result of this user-generated content?
Some of the things that our community would come up with as ways to engage their friends and family and their networks with their fundraising or with their mullet and what they were doing with it was even better than anything that we could think of as a team. Our job was to be really reactive to those things and try to bring as many of those stories and as many of that content to the feed that we could. There was one guy who was our top fundraiser in 2024 in Western Australia who had like a full rainbow mullet. So it was all 7 colours halfway down his back, and he worked in the mines in Western Australia. That was a really fun one to see him taking photos with his rainbow mullet on big machinery or underground with the high vis on. Our audience really loves because there's a lot of overlap with certain types of industries and people involved with the campaign. We saw people, updating their mullet throughout the campaign. If they hit a certain fundraising milestone or whoever donated the most by a certain date could pick the color. They dyed their mullet at the end of the campaign month. So there's all those fun stories. I think our job was to connect with those people, really acknowledge and recognize the effort that they were going to engage with the campaign and to fundraise, and find appropriate ways that they agreed to bring that content to light and share it on with the community. Because we knew that if we really loved that type of content in our team and in Mullets HQ, the community would love it just as much, if not more. It would drive people to engage in more interesting, funnier and weirder ways across the campaign.
Over the years, have you seen some of the same mullets come up again, the same fundraisers? How have you kept that relationship outside of the campaign month?
We're really fortunate to have so many returning fundraisers, returning people that are so committed to our cause, whether they raise a lot of money or they do additional volunteering or advocacy work, or they just become a brand and campaign advocate or ambassador for the work that we're doing. We did see a lot of returning fundraisers come through We tried to make an effort to retain those interactions and keep them going. You have the peak of their attention during the campaign, and it is quite a large commitment. We tended to be relatively low to mid-touch in the outer season period through the other half of the year, but we would definitely keep them in the loop with fundraising achievements where we would finish up at the end of the campaign, and then we would start a regular monthly newsletter impact outer season communications journey that would focus on keeping them engaged, giving them updates about the work we're doing at Black Dog as a result of the funds they've raised or the Mullets community has raised over time.
Would you say that's the secret to keeping fundraisers coming back, keeping them updated, but not with too many asks throughout the year outside of the campaign?
I think that's something that we're always grappling with internally, finding that right balance. And it definitely depends on the audience. What we found with a male target audience in particular was that they tended to be quite low touch, low engagement out of season and a lot less active on email. We had to find different ways to communicate and interact with them over time through email, SMS, Instagram, or a direct email that was more personal or more one-to-one and kind of felt like it came from me or someone else in the team that might have been the person that stewarded their relationship through the campaign. Mullets is such a distinctive offering and experience. That's really the centerpiece of how people want to be involved with the campaign. Over time, the team can continue to test other things to extend that contribution and that level of support, or find different ways. If someone doesn't do Mullets, how else could they be involved and fundraise for Black Dog Institute in the future?
You mentioned before that sense of community that the campaign brought. I think the story of people reaching out fundraisers saying, hey, whoever donates this much can pick my hair color. Can you give us some other examples of how it built community?
We tried so many different things over time, constantly trying to make positive actions to build community. We would connect people in the local area, just little kind of social things and be like, hey, there's a couple people in your area that are doing mullets. We would share people's events. We spoke to a VIP and they said, I'm doing a fundraising event. If anyone else who's doing mullets in this area wants to come along. We personally hosted a few events where we would do mullet shaves for people in the team and invite VIPs as a way of recognizing them. One year we had a partnership with Skydive Australia and we did a skydive in Wollongong and invited a bunch of our VIP fundraisers. All of those things together really build more of an emotional connection or a positive emotional connection to the campaign. We wanted people to feel like they were a part of something and they were connected to something. Just as important for us was walking the walk in the mental health space around the importance of creating positive spaces, of creating community, of embedding support and people feeling like they could make a positive action. We also did work with professional athletes who we titled Mullets Legends and allowed people to interact with them in some way or join their team. If they didn't know anyone else doing mullets, they could do mullets with a professional athlete and join their team.
There's some really good examples of how you help facilitate that community building.
Yeah, it was always a consistent theme for us and something that we built on over time. And there was probably a lot of things in there that we tried and they didn't work. That was probably just as valuable along the way. We felt like the more of those positive interactions we could have with our supporters over time, the more they would feel connected to us, connected to the community and connected to the cause of the campaign.
There are definitely lots of upsides to making the community or your fundraisers the hero of every campaign story rather than the brand. What about the sense of ownership and danger that comes with having to moderate the microphone that you give to your people? Can you give me an example of where you came up against some content that made you feel uneasy or just wasn't quite on brand or right for the campaign and what you did about it?
Yeah, that's such an important point. A really significant consideration for managing large-scale campaigns, particularly with causes like mental health and suicide prevention that are quite sensitive in nature. Engaging in a way where they're sharing personal stories of a sensitive or a distressing nature means there's a lot of workload and responsibility for us with social moderation. Through our experiences from 2022, we changed the time of year with the campaign. Through that period, we really doubled down and focused on suicide prevention as the main driving force behind the proposition for the campaign, because we knew that it was such a closely tied cause area to men, in particular in Australia. We also knew that when we spoke to a lot of our fundraisers and donors, the main thing that they cared about and they wanted to hear most about was suicide prevention. We really strengthened that proposition over time and featured suicide prevention through all of our messaging from 2024 onwards. But the double-edged sword of that was then having the responsibility and the workload of doing the social moderation in paid social advertising, where we had quite significant spend and you're pushing it out to quite a broad online digital audience. And talking about suicide prevention, you're going to get a lot of negative and distressing things to moderate. We really had to work on developing a more robust framework and support system to adapt to that demand, because that was much higher than anything we'd experienced with either of our campaigns. We worked really hard to get it to a good place, and it did improve significantly. The shock value of that initial adjustment period in 2024 was quite significant when we saw the volume and the nature of distressing comments that would come through moderation.
What kind of negative or distressing things were coming up?
It would range on a daily basis. So naturally, with something that is quite fun and trivial of an activity of mullets, we would get low-level ones that would be questioning the campaign, like, what does a mullet do for mental health or suicide prevention? That's very much in the easy bucket. We would get that stuff daily and be able to deal and work through that. The ones that were quite challenging were when there was a mention of suicide. If people were sharing personal lived experience or living experience of mental ill health, those ones are quite very, very sensitive and need to be professionally dealt with a level of care for the person, the community, and our team quite urgently. That's quite a demand on our team and their attention. And looking across our channels, we would also get a lot of commentary about mental health in Australia. And naturally, when we're actively going out with media spend and putting content in front of people that's talking about mental health, that's talking about suicide prevention, that's talking about the core statistics and the current state of mental health in Australia, when people do have negative or mixed or distressing personal experiences, they want an outlet to share that. And while it wasn't always relevant, we would have to sort through and moderate a lot of comments from people across the country that have very valid personal experiences of what they're currently going through. We would have to sort through and moderate a lot of those comments in an appropriate way to determine if there was support services that we could escalate them to or provide, whether we needed to hide or delete comments. It was a very common occurrence, and appropriate ways that we could support our team through that function of doing that volume of social moderation for the campaign.
Yeah, that sounds tough. And just clarify, so paid social content tended to have more negative comments or commentary than organic?
Yeah, you're out in deep water would be how I would describe that. Our negative or contentious social moderation would be 99% paid content, 1% organic. Our organic audiences are a little bit more earned, qualified, and supportive of Black Dog as an organisation, our cause, and involved with the campaign. So we would see less and less instances of negative things that we would have to moderate. In the deep water of paid social advertising and talking about these sensitive issues, that's where we would get a lot of volume and high levels of distress.
Looking back at what you have overcome with the team trying to moderate that content, what would you have done differently, or what's changed now that you would always mandate for future campaigns?
Where we grew a lot from 2024 to the next One Foot Forward campaign, our Mullets campaign earlier this year, was more robust. We had adjusted our own expectations of what we were getting ourselves into. And so we put a strong premium on robust, comprehensive training up front with our team to manage their expectations, social moderation. We redeveloped the way we escalated internally across our organization with our digital and social media team. to alleviate some of the burden and some of the responsibility for our frontline team to take all of the most difficult ones and updated what was an appropriate best practice response for us in those instances. We did a lot more training. We sought external training and tried to time that training when our pop-up teams would start to make sure that they were as prepared as possible. Through the process, we really looked at ways in which we could support our people, which was always the biggest priority for me. How can I best support my team and their well-being? We instituted weekly check-ins, informal coffee catch-ups in our courtyard at work where we discuss some of these topics openly and decompress a little bit. Social moderation was quite an intense task. We became flexible and adaptable in rotating staff through that function. And if they did have a really difficult day, instead of keeping them on, we'd go, all right, you're off for the next couple of days. That tends to relax the situation because people don't feel the burden of, oh, I just had a really hard day on moderation. Now I have to go back and do it again tomorrow morning. We learned a lot through that process, a lot of one-to-one check-ins, a lot of screen breaks, encouraging our staff that if they found something significantly affected them, to take some time away from the screen. And then being proactive in following up, checking in, always being available for one-to-one chats, whether that was myself, another manager, or a third-party person in the broader team, having that healthy culture within our team and being used to working through those situations, connecting team members to our EAP service or an in-house clinic of clinical psychologists that service the community if we needed to refer or escalate to them. So it was having a lot in the toolbox over time that we could be responsive to how someone was going and what their day was like and which of those options at different points throughout the campaign they felt would help them the most and get them back in a healthy frame of mind working on the campaign.
I don't want to dwell too much on the negatives because the campaign just did so much good for so many people. But do you have any other signs other than year-on-year returners that you saw as an outcome of the campaign? You went, yes, we're winning here. This is great. I know I'm making an impact.
Yeah, there was always those signals that we could observe through the community. So returning fundraisers and support through Mullets was quite a big emphasis for us in our strategy and planned activities each year with the campaign, building long-term supporters for Black Dog as an organisation. Mullets is quite a fun campaign, but doesn't always lend itself to repeat participation because someone might do it one year and then the following year they've cut their hair and they don't want to do it or they want to do something else. So I think when we felt like we were doing our best work was even if they weren't returning on something like Mullets, did they do something else? So did they give to an appeal, whether it was like a tax appeal or a Christmas appeal, or did they do a third party event? Did they run in City to Surf or do a marathon and fundraise for Black Dog? Did they have their own DIY fundraising event? Because we knew that the origin of that came from Mullets. That was always a good signal that we'd created that really positive, strong connection with our cause and the organisation and that someone would continue to give to Black Dog Institute in the future. In my time there, over 3 years, we would see people not do it the following year, but then they'd come back. And I felt like that was always a good indicator. These people that give are giving to multiple organisations. But if they came back, we knew we'd left a positive impression and it was something they wanted to continue to be a part of in the future. And then just engagement. If we had conversations with people, even if they weren't continuing to do the campaign, they would share it with their friends and family or someone they thought would do it. We'd see them come up in donations in the future. They'd find ways to donate to the campaign. There was, quite a few signals that we would keep an eye on over time that would not always translate into a direct dollar amount, but would give us the indication that people really created a really good connection with the campaign and wanted to support in the long term.
Have you ever had someone from the community come up to you, Tom, and say, I've been struggling with my mental health, but since learning about the campaign or seeing it on Instagram, I've done something about it?
Yeah, that was quite a regular occurrence. We really have so many people across Australia that do our campaign. We knew about our audience. They wanted to make a positive action towards a cause that they really cared about. When they have quite a strong cause connection, it's really based on a personal experience. For a lot of our participants, it was in excess of 30, 40, 50%. There was some lived or living experience of mental ill health element, whether it was current, previous, or through a family member or a friend. So we were constantly having conversations with supporters about that. And I think what Mullets as a community and a campaign allowed them to do is to make that positive action, to participate in or to feel a part of, even if they weren't a super active participant, but they felt a part of something. Anytime I got the chance to connect with community and talk to some of our top mullet legends around what they were doing and why they enjoyed doing the campaign so much and what it gave to them, I think that was really true to the impact of the campaign and what I connected with over time.
So, if we look at content and fundraising in the context of men's mental health, what advice would you give to someone at a nonprofit around content types or language choices regarding men's mental health?
One of the things we would always focus on is just meeting them where they're at, creating a welcoming place for men to be a part of something. I think you see that so much through the way that men socialize, whether it's down at the cafe, dad's club, a sports club. There's definitely that need to socialize and feel connected to something. We wanted to create that type of place through Mullets as a campaign. We wanted it to reflect them. We didn't want to speak down to our community. We wanted it to look and feel and sound very much like them. Just little things like in language, we would lean into a lot of contractions, which doesn't always pass the test of plain English or what you're taught working in this space, but with our audience would really connect really well. Even to the point of just mimicking the way that people would speak to us. Like we would receive DMs and they'd be very informal or broken or contractions or the slang, and that's connected to the cultural piece of mullets in Australia and leaning into that where appropriate in a way to connect with men. And our fundraisers was something really successful with the campaign and people feeling like it wasn't this big charity that they were talking to. They were talking to another person that understood them, their experiences, and they felt welcomed and included into a community that looked and sounded like them and invited them to be a participant in that.
To put my question into context, can you summarize why we need to be mindful of the way we talk about men's mental health in relation to the stigma or stereotypes that might be present?
In the men's mental health space, there's quite a few stereotypes around how men interact with mental health. It's positive to focus on a strengths-based approach, creating positive spaces for men to interact and not focusing too much on negative or contentious stereotypes or assumptions about their behaviour.
If you were to talk about your campaign and what you've learnt, some principles you apply to everything that you do moving forward, what would be 3 things that come to mind?
It's been such a great experience working on this campaign. Some of the ones that I come back to is meeting the audience where they're at, particularly with non-traditional or diverse audiences. Where are they? What channels are they on? What language do they speak? And how can you engage in a meaningful way? I think being able to double down on distinctive. So Mullets is quite a distinctive, fun campaign. And we wanted to lean into that as much as possible to not make it look and feel like other campaigns. I think the last one was to be people first in how we work, both as a leader, with my team, and with the community.
Thank you, Tom. Any last reflections on what you've learned and how that's maybe changed you?
I'm just very grateful for the opportunity to work in this space and to work on a cause that I feel personally connected to and to give back to that and to follow the fun and see where that's led, being able to work on a campaign like Mullets for Mental Health is something that I'm really grateful and proud of.
Have you become friends with any mullet legends in Wollongong?
Yeah, I have actually. There's a few people that I keep in touch with now that were really active participants with the campaign, and a few people across the country as well that I'll keep in touch with. I'm sure they'll pop back up with mullets in the future.
That's amazing. Where can
Yeah.
people find you, Tom, if they want to learn more about mullets for mental health?
For the campaign, if they type in Mullets for Mental Health, Black Dog Institute, or just mulletsformentalhealth.org.au, that's our website. The campaign will go live again towards the end of January next year. You can find me on LinkedIn, Tom Farrar. I would love to hear any conversations, thoughts, or reflections on our conversation.
Thank you so much, Tom.
Thanks.